Hi there, my name is Kate Bowler, and I'm here with my absolutely delightful, beautiful friend, Suleika. Suleika, I would have this conversation with you anywhere, any place, and I'm just so glad that we get to do it now.
Oh, me too. The feeling is so mutual. As I was saying earlier, I'm just sad we're not in Aspen, but we can pretend we're in Aspen.
Absolutely. Truly. I we have such a strange kind of commonality, which is that we've both um, dealt with cancer in an ongoing way at a very early age. And after reading your completely stunning book, Between Two Kingdoms, I thought maybe we might have a little conversation about some of the lessons I kind of drew from your book about true hard things that are true about having cancer at a young age, which might also be true for people who are thinking about how to manage and endure their sort of life after pandemic. The second anyone gets to know your story, one of the hard true things that pops up right away is nobody told me that I would lose so much, maybe so soon. You had a very precipitous decline slash experience. I wonder if you wouldn't mind just starting us there.
Yeah, I mean, as a culture, we're so steeped in the cult of positivity. You know, we're told to search for the silver lining, to stay positive, to stay strong. And I think when I first got diagnosed with leukemia at age 22, I was determined to remain the same person I'd been. I thought I was just going to have a short sojourn in the kingdom of the sick and that I wouldn't need to unpack my bags. And I resisted that label of cancer patient and was determined to keep pursuing the same things I'd been pursuing, after graduation. But of course, that didn't happen. Pretty immediately, I started to count those losses. And there were so many of them that happened so quickly that it left me kind of reeling and breathless. There was the loss of my identity as I'd known it. There was the loss of my hair during chemo, which was like the first outward symbol and confirmation of what I knew but hadn't fully felt real yet. There were the loss of friends who I'd expected to be there and who didn't show up. There was the loss of infertility. Um, More than anything, I felt the loss of time, I think. Um, this sense that the future was limitless no longer rang true to me. Uh, my days felt numbered, and there was a sense of urgency that came with that.
Yeah, that was maybe one of the strange little bits of. I wonder if you felt this too at the beginning of the pandemic, things that kind of felt like it was, I don't know, like if somebody rings like a crystal glass and then it starts to like ring other things in the room, but like something that rang from cancer for me through the pandemic was like the feeling of being robbed. Like I had time and now you're taking it from me, just kind of being squeezed into a life that is like not listening to what I need and what I love and who I am and what I need to do.
Yeah, totally. I think there's a way in which when we're in the midst of a reckoning, no matter what that reckoning is, we get pinned to the present. The past no longer feels applicable, and if anything, it reminds us of what's no longer possible, and the future's full of uncertainty and fear. And there's a kind of narrowing of your vision when you're made to be present in that way that can be really alarming and
Yeah.
uncomfortable because we
Yeah.
have to see what's directly in front of us and we have to confront ourselves.
It's so funny. I'm such like a kind of, I mean, I won't say sweet. No one calls themselves sweet, but sort of just like an easygoing person. But like you're describing that with such gorgeous precision-filled language, I feel like a surge of rage. Like I'm like, oh my gosh, someone's taking my time. Like, 'cause, like I think you're exactly right. We have to renegotiate. We're getting pinned to the present. What a perfect phrase. It makes me feel like claustrophobic, just even you describing it.
Totally. And I think, there's also a centering, clarifying power that comes with that. That, at least for me, felt necessary. There was a way in which all the kind of artifice and anything that felt superficial just could no longer exist in that present. And I saw things really clearly. Probably, I think I saw things more clearly than I ever have in my life. And I think that's one of the strange things about being on the other side of this experience is I sometimes miss that sense of clarity. I try to imagine now what I would do or what would feel important if I felt that sense of time being limited, because I think it's a useful exercise for all of us. But especially when you're young, right? We feel immortal. We feel like we have time to get to the things we want to do. And of course, that's true and not true for all of us, no matter how old we are.
Yeah. Oh, oh, I love every word of that. There was a like a crystalline beauty to things that helped me know what to love and better than I ever have before. And you're right, maybe better than I ever have since. So I really resonate with what you're saying. Um, I wonder too, when I was thinking about your story, another true hard thing um, was that maybe no one ever told me how guilty I would feel being hemmed in, having a crisis. I know that it was a lot. It's just, you imagine that if you're the primary sufferer, that guilt is not a primary emotion. But when you're suddenly the center of everyone's orbit, um, I imagine it like reorders all of your relationships in a way you would not have chosen.
It's such an important observation, and I think one we don't talk about enough. I mean, grief for me was my constant companion throughout all 4 years. And I know that my mom and my family and friends would have been sad to hear me say that. I felt guilty because of the amount of resources I was taking up. I felt guilty that my mom had put aside her career because she needed to be my primary caregiver. And even though it was a labor of love, I was very cognizant of the fact that it was a whole lot of labor. I was, I felt guilty about the financial strain that the situation was placing on my parents and my brother, who was my bone marrow donor and who felt such tremendous pressure because in his mind, and he was, a senior in college at the time, if my bone marrow transplant failed, it was going to be his fault. And it wasn't a rational thought, but all of it was rational. The guilt wasn't necessarily rational. And I think that's what makes it so hard to talk about things like guilt. Um, because if we do dare to kind of give voice to it, then the immediate reaction often is, oh no, you shouldn't feel that. Um, and of course, we know that too. Um, but it's one of those things I think very much like shame that kind of festers and multiplies until you kind of bring it up to the sunlight.
Hmm. Hmm. It's, and as people who are trying to see things clearly, trying to love the right things, trying to make the right evaluations, I think it's such a fair emotion when we're just noticing with our eyes and with our ears that there is an economy of scarcity just because we're all human and there's only so much money and only so much resources and only so much, daylight. And it reminds me of some of the exhaustion I'm hearing from first responders or parents or people who are like, am I allowed to break down? Am I allowed to feel tired? Am I allowed to not want to be a primary caregiver a year into an earth plague? But guilt, I'm sure guilt as feels like the response when you know that it's limited and there might not be enough.
Yeah, and I think it's also a, like somehow tied to not feeling a sense of agency, um, and therefore like not fully understanding why certain things were, what I could possibly do about them. and then just like swimming in this lagoon of guilt. Like I felt guilty about my diagnosis. I would kind of time travel and wonder, like, was it that cigarette I smoked in college? Was it like all those all-nighters? Was it, I don't know, with sugar and the caffeine? And you try to locate a reason.
Yeah.
Um, and even if you do find a reason, of course, that doesn't mean that you're any more deserving of whatever diagnosis or whatever difficult thing has happened to you.
Yeah, yeah, which totally, I mean, explains people's rush to, and I mean, this is the third thing I guess I wanted to reflect about your book is the feeling like maybe no one ever told me how strange it would be to live in the after, like not yet fully healed, like not fully sick and not fully well, kind of life feeling. Um, what I always think of is like in my mind, I'm always thinking like life is a chronic condition, and I get kind of like I find that like the ongoingness of that, and I find that it. I mean, part of the remember at the beginning of the pandemic that rush where everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm finally going to use those free weights in the gym. Like I'm gonna like my after, there a rush to hyper agency, a rush to sounds to you like that's another response to being feeling hemmed in and then not being sure how to re-enter a world that's remade."
I'd spent 4 years dreaming of being on the other side of this, of kind of finding myself back in the kingdom of the well. But that didn't happen. Instead, I was kind of suspended in this liminal space where, like, on paper, it was over, but off paper, I couldn't have felt further from being like the healthy, happy 26-year-old I hoped to be on the other side of all that. I was carrying the wreckage of this experience. I was having almost a kind of reverse culture shock. I had no real clue of what the path forward was for me, of who I really was. I knew I wasn't the same person I'd been before my diagnosis and that I couldn't return to being that person. But the future felt completely blank in a way that was frightening. And I think it's something that we're all living right now as we begin to like tentatively do certain things that many of us haven't done for the last year. I just got on my first plane in a year, and it was like I felt like I'd forgotten how to pack and forgotten how to speak to humans outside of my corn pod. Um, and I think all of us, are going to be forever changed by this pandemic. And the question for me is, you know, what parts of this experience need to be left behind? What parts of it I want to carry forward with me? Um, and how this strange time of being kind of suspended, um, and how having to kind of step away from the culture of busyness, like how all of that is going to inform uh, what we do next.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, because and that was like the fourth kind of thing I was thinking about your is the like the no one ever told me when I'm allowed to stop being afraid. But that I mean that is you're right, is the challenge of moving forward is which parts of this time of intense restriction do we I just find fear to be such an unusual companion for making choices, like because usually fear has helped me figure out what I love with a really bright clarity. But then but you have to let the miasma of all of the rest of it go, which feels like really tough math. Like which so especially when we've had such a prolonged amount of like learning to be afraid of everything, just trying to step out into a strange different kind of courage, I guess.
Yeah, and I think when the ceiling caves in on you, either because of a diagnosis or, we've all had that experience collectively, globally in the last year, you no longer assume structural stability. And you have to kind of learn to live along fault lines. Um, and that's difficult, right? It means living with um, a sense of uncertainty and possibility also. Um, and it's also, I think, a heightened awareness of what the Grain Jodidian describes about how life can change in an ordinary instant. And I think there's a way in which, at least for me, like that fear, um, it always feels like I'm either, it's either threatening to hijack my entire day or it's the thing that's going to ignite me to do the things that I know are important.
Totally. You're right. You're right. For me, it's either the darkness or the flashlight, and I can't figure out which which one it is.
I love that. The darkness or the flashlight. That's the perfect image for it. Uh-huh.
Suleika, you are wise and kind, and the way you use categories with such grace to help us all, it just continues to inspire me. So, thanks so much for having this conversation with me. This was beautiful.
Kate, thank you. And I hope the next time we do this, I get to interview you because I could fangirl for many hours about your brilliant mind and your brilliant books and all the incredible work you're doing.
Thanks
It's
so
an
much.
honor.
This was awesome.